Good morning, thank you very much. I wasn't expecting so many people, so I'm really humbled. I'm really sorry I was late. The problem with being a Southwark-centric is you are, as leader of Southwark Council, is you do tend to assume that everything happens in Southwark. It wasn't until I was making my way to Tooley Street that I suddenly remembered I wasn't supposed to be in Tooley Street, I was supposed to be in Store Street, which I shouldn't have forgotten because my first ever job was just round the corner, and I had thought last week when I was briefed about this how nice it would be to go back and see the first office. I'm sorry I'm late. I'm very grateful to James for doing the warm-up act. As warm-up acts go, the Shard of Glass isn't a bad one. I thought what I'd do, I've decided to spare you a sort of death by PowerPoint presentation. I thought what might be useful would be if I did you a brief introduction to Regeneration in Southwark as a whole, of which the whole Borough and Bankside bit is a part, just so you get an understanding of where the politicians are coming from about this, and then something about challenges and opportunities, particularly in the Borough and Bankside area. And I'm sort of emboldened by this by my experience yesterday evening, where I went to a community meeting at Walworth to talk about the much fabled Elephant and Castle regeneration, which is something that the council began talking about in 1998, and where first things are just beginning to come out of the ground really now, where for all sorts of impeccably good reasons, mostly associated with the fact that that wasn't a great big urban regeneration scheme which came with a great big slab of central government funding. We've been hugely reliant on deals with the market to make anything happen. Progress has been a lot slower than we would have wanted. And an audience which was initially quite hostile and sceptical, as I sort of took them through the story and helped them understand the different choices we'd made, actually came around to feeling that perhaps, although some of the choices we made hadn't been, with the benefit of hindsight, great, they were reasonable choices to have made at the time, and actually still did retain that sense of excitement about the essential vision about what we're trying to do at the Elephant and Castle. So what's it all about? I'm fond of saying that about 20 years ago, if you'd invited the leader of Southwark to come to one of these events, A, they wouldn't, and they just wouldn't have come at all, and B, the sales pitch for Southwark at the time was desperate. Southwark was a South London borough. We were South London. We had our back to the river. We were poor, we were miserable. You wouldn't want to live in Southwark. It was all Thatcher's fault because she'd closed the docks and somebody should give us lots of money. And the more that Southwark Council said, we're poor, we're miserable, you wouldn't want to live here, the more people agreed and didn't. The more we said it was Thatcher's fault and she should give us money, she didn't. And generally speaking, we were sort of beginning to get sucked into a spiral of decline. And in the early 1990s, Southwark Council began to kind of rethink itself and rethink Southwark's place in London. And we stopped being a South London borough with our back to the river, and we started to think of ourselves as a Central London borough. Respectable, we came up in old. We're a Central London borough. We faced and embraced the river, and actually we wanted a slice of that Central London action. We had been poor, we had been miserable, we didn't want to go on being poor and miserable for another 200 years. And the, sort of the emblematic change, I guess, from Southwark Council's point of view is that the borough which tried to, I think to its eternal shame, tried to stop the Globe Theatre being built because it didn't want middle-class people coming to watch Shakespeare by the river. This was before my time, so long before my time. Became the council that funded the initial feasibility study that said, hey, you know that crumbling power station in Bankside, you could actually turn that into a modern art gallery, Tate, would you like to come? That's kind of the emblematic change in thinking about Southwark and its place in London. And why do we do this? Because Southwark is a fantastically centrally located borough. We like to think of ourselves as the Central London borough. If you take a map of Greater London and gerrymander ever so slightly, you can say that Southwark is right at the heart of London. And it's got this tremendously rich heritage of which we're tremendously proud. The best heckle I've ever had, but hey, feel free to compete. The best heckle I've ever had was when I was once talking about why is it that so many of the great figures in British cultural history have some kind of connection with Southwark. Geoffrey Chaucer starts the Canterbury Tales with the pilgrims gathering at the Tabard Inn to set off along the Old Kent Road. Shakespeare lived and wrote plays in Bankside. Dickens's childhood was scarred by his father being thrown into the Marshalsea prison. William Blake wrote Jerusalem while walking down Blackfriars Road. Charlie Chaplin, the great British genius of 20th century cinema, born in East Street. What is it, I once said, what is it that mystically connects all these great artistic figures in British cultural history and connects them with Borough and Bankside? And somebody at the back of the room yelled out, cheap property prices. Stopped me in my tracks. And they're probably right. So there's a tremendously rich heritage, but Southwark has always been one of the poorer areas of London, and there's this sort of banana-shaped slice of poverty through the East End, through South London. And the figures are truly scary. So Southwark is the 26th poorest place that you can hope to live anywhere in England and Wales. And I find that kind of staggering. Forget those old coalfield areas, forget the west coast of Scotland, forget the northeast shipyards, forget South Wales. Right here, right in the heart of London, as you can see, literally just across the river from the City of London, two tube stops on the Jubilee line away from Westminster. We have areas where children's life expectancy is 10, 17 years less if you're born in certain parts of Peckham or certain parts of Walworth than you would be if you were born on the other side of the river. One of the most interesting stats that's currently doing the rounds on the public sector circuit is the piece of research that the Department of Children's Schools and Family have done about GCSE attainment. For those of you who left school a while ago, GCSEs are O-levels in old speak. And basically the gold standard is if you leave school with at least 5 passes at O-level, including English and maths, your employment prospects are generally quite good. If you leave school without 5 good GCSEs, including English and maths, your employment prospects are generally quite poor. That's a huge generalisation, there are huge exceptions to that, but basically speaking, you want your child to leave school with 5 passes at GCSE, including English and maths, as a minimum. And there is a total correlation between parental income and GCSE attainment. If you are in the top 10% of income earners in this country, your children have a 68% chance of getting those O-level grades. They are more likely than not to get those O-level grades. If you are in the bottom 10% of income earners, your children have a 25% chance of getting those grades. 1 in 4 chance of getting those grades. And for every 10% of income your parents go up, your chance of getting those magic grades at GCSE rise by 5%. Straight exponential curve. Lord Darzai, when he was doing his health inequalities report for the government, helpfully produced, from Southwark's point of view, a map of the Jubilee line, which helpfully pointed out that for every stop east you go from Westminster, you lose a life off your life expectancy. Cheers, Lord Darzai, that really helps our property prices. So poverty actually really matters. Poverty actually really matters. And most of our day job at Southwark Council is spent dealing with the consequences of the fact that the population we exist to serve are so desperately poor. Poor standards of educational attainment, poor standards of housing, poor levels of public health, particularly mental ill health, all impact on what Southwark Council has to do in the day-to-day. And we don't want to go on mopping up with the consequences of social failure. We want our people to be bright, active, economically active citizens who have the opportunity to take the best of everything that London has to offer. And that requires a radical rethink about Southwark as a place and what we want to attract to Southwark, which is why things like the Shard of Glass, which is why things like the more London development, which you can see in this photograph, are for us hugely important emblematic symbols of that kind of city-based economic activity coming south of the river for the first time. The fact that it's actually now possible for developers like James or like More London to build these kind of office developments for companies like Norton Rose or Lawrence Graham or Price Waterhouse then to decide to have smart corporate headquarters south of the river is hugely important to us. When one of the companies who are currently based at More London were first sniffing around, they came to see me in my capacity as leader of the council and said, we're thinking of relocating to this area by Tower Bridge. And I said, yeah, it's great, it's going to be fantastic, you should come. And they said, partners are very unsure, you know, traditional city-based firm, a bit unsure about coming south of the river. Huge step. And I said, well, you know, it's just across Tower Bridge really, isn't it? And they said, you're very poor in Southwark, aren't you? I said, yes, desperate levels of poverty. They said, will we get an EU resettlement grant for coming here? I was saying, it's not Poland. So over the last 10, 15 years, the whole of the Borough and Bankside area, I think, has been completely rethought by the council as an area. And I think that Riverside fringe, I think we've been now very successful in establishing, not just in Southwark, but right across London, and I think increasingly nationally, internationally, as part of that whole London offer. The figure that the Tate had a couple of years ago was that the Tate Modern was attracting something like 3 million visitors a year, and I think was second only to Blackpool Pleasure Beach as the most visited tourist destination anywhere in the country. Who would have thought 10, 15 years ago that 3 million people a year would be coming to the Bankside power station? And what we found though was that it's very difficult to attract people through the railway viaduct that sort of slices this very narrow northern railway fringe. And again, one of the great things about the Shard from our point of view is that it's going to bring people south of London Bridge Station. At the moment, if you sort of stand outside London Bridge Station doing a time motion study, what you'll see is that everyone comes out and turns right and goes over London Bridge or heads towards More London. What we need to do is to get people sort of turning left, going to do business in the Shard or the associated businesses that will spring up with it. And we need to get that sort of activity going down, which is why our next big project is the Elephant and Castle, the next big place down here, a fabulously well-connected part of London. 2 tube lines and Thameslink and virtually every bus in South London all stop at the Elephant and Castle. And at the moment, people scurry from one form of public transport to the other as quickly as they can, heads down, frightened of getting stabbed, not spending any time or any money in the area at all. And in fact, the Elephant and Castle should be, always historically was, the Piccadilly Circus of South London. It's as far south of the river as Piccadilly Circus is north of the river, should be a major retail entertainment centre as well as being a residential area. That's what we hope to recreate at the Elephant and Castle. And I think then there'll be a kind of join the dots progression heading south. We can begin to feel the development pressure of that already, going down Bermondsey Street and going down Blackfriars Road particularly, of this area and the Elephant and Castle and then everything in between. This isn't easy. It's very, very challenging, particularly for those long-term residents who've been living in the area for a long time and have noticed, can fail to have noticed, but are feeling the impact of all the changes on them. And the ward councillors are constantly reminding me that while we all think Borough Market is bright and busy and sexy and emblematic of everything that's good about fresh food and exciting markets and retails and niche and so on, if you live by Borough Market, it's a right pain in the arse every weekend, actually. You used to be able to park outside your house. Now you sort of fight for parking spaces. You get sort of people sprawling out of pubs and all the rubbish problems and so on. And there are always downsides to change. I think, so far, the host community, if you like, the Indigenous long-term community, have been relatively good and relaxed about the development on their doorstep. And I think that one thing we've become better about is working with them and working with developers to make sure that Section 106 agreements and so on do actually really benefit the local community and do match their aspirations. And I think that's one of the most important tricks that we've learned, is to sort of have Section 106 agreements that reflect real local priorities, not always just what a bunch of planning officers, no disrespect, think might be wanted. And I think that's crucial. But I think we are beginning to feel, particularly in Cathedrals Ward, particularly that stretch between Blackfriars Bridge and London Bridge, we kind of need time out for a bit. There has been so much change. There is so much consented and still to be built, that particularly up in that northern area around the cathedral, around Borough Market, on the western side of Borough High Street, we've kind of reached a critical mass point where we just need to take a pause, allow the stuff to settle, and see where we go next. Conversely, on the eastern side of Borough High Street, by London Bridge Station, there are clearly huge opportunities. It's one of the Mayor's opportunity areas. There are still vacant brownfield sites. The fact that we were able, I don't know whether James made this point, but the fact that the Shard got planning consent from Southwark Council without a single local objection, taken to planning appeal only because of English heritage and this wretched obsession they have about the Duke of Buckinghamshire's views from Kenwood House in 1672 or whatever it is that turns them on. But the fact that you were able, the fact that Southwark as a planning authority gave planning permission for 60 stories, Canary Wharf with Big Ben on top. I mean, I forget what it is, but this is a huge development of the sort that would normally stir up an awful lot of local angst and resentment. But because of the dialogue that we were able to broker between local residents and developer, by the fact that we were able to point out to people that here was a major development which didn't take up a single blade of grass in an area, it was absolutely crying out for green space. Those kind of arguments won the day. And all my experience is that time spent doing consultation with community groups, slow, painful though it can be, does actually lead to real results in terms of getting participation in active involvement in the planning process and getting things built without too much community angst. Further down again towards the Elephant and Castle, again actively trying to encourage development around there. Later this year you'll begin to see Transport for London removing the southern roundabout at the top of the Walworth Road, which is very important for us. Strata Tower, which is the tallest residential building in London for all of 5 minutes. These records seem to last, don't they? Will be the tallest residential in London for a while. And sort of almost literally now puts the Elephant and Castle on the map. It's one of those things where you keep seeing from around the place, like the London Eye, you can begin to say, oh, that's the Elephant and Castle, that's the Strata Tower. And I think that was everything I wanted to say, but I've got a ward councillor who's staring at me and a sort of, you've forgotten to mention something sort of like, no. I think I'll drop at that point. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any after that whirlwind tour through my mind. The only thing, the last remaining plug I wanted to make is, bizarrely, of all the things I do as leader of the council, I've been trying to top this up, actually, sadly. And I think probably I've spent more time passing more planning policies than policies on any other aspect of Southwark Council activity. And in fact, I don't quite know how the planning profession in this country manage it, but in terms of sort of perpetual motion machine, which constantly manages to reinvent the need to produce more policies and more pieces of paper, we all have, I think, lessons to learn from the Institute of Town and Country Planning professionals. But we are about to produce the supplementary planning guidance document. What do we call these things these days? Supplementary planning thing, a thing about Borough and Bankside, which will try to flesh out some of these concerns that will be put in planner speak, not politicians speak. So you may need to read between the lines slightly. But I commend that to your attention as being our vision out for consultation, but our embryonic vision about the way to go in this area over the next 5-10 years. Thank you.